Now, moving on. I can read about what it was like to lose everything during the Great Depression, but I don't have the emotional scars of those who actually experienced it. And the person who lived through it can't fathom why someone like me could come across as complacent about things like owning stocks. We see the world through a different lens. Correct? That's what I was telling you in the previous video. Like, if we don't have the first hand knowledge, like we haven't gone through the Great Depression, so we can't understand the fear and the emotions. Like, we will take risk, okay, but someone who has gone through Great Depression, he will hesitate in investing in stocks. Spreadsheets can model the historic frequency of big stock market declines, but they can't model the feeling of coming home, looking at your kids and wondering if you have made a mistake that will impact their lives. Studying history makes you feel like you understand something, but until you have lived through it and personally felt its consequences, you may not understand it enough to change your behavior. Correct. Like us, this generation hasn't gone through the Great Depression era, and we haven't seen the World War II with our eyes. Like, we have not gone through such situations, so we can't carry the emotional scar which our previous generation must have felt in those times. Like, it was kind of miserable situations for them. Like, suppose a person only have 100k dollar, okay, and he invests in stocks at that time. Now if he come to home and look at their kids, so he may wonder if he had made a mistake which can impact their kids life. I'm talking about the Great Depression era, okay. So in that time it was a huge risk. We all think we know how the world works, but we have all only experienced a tiny sliver of it. Correct, very correct. I will repeat this line again. We all think we know how the world works, but we have all only experienced a tiny sliver of it. Like, we know that we behave like we know everything in the world and how this world works, but we have experienced only a tiny piece of it. As investor Michael Batnick says, some lessons have to be experienced before they can be understood. We are all victims in different ways to that truth. Correct. If you want, I can repeat it. Some lessons have to be experienced before they can be understood. Like, you have to understand some kind of situations, then only you will learn the lesson. In 2006, economist Ulrich Malmendier and Stephen Nagel from the National Bureau of Economic Research dug through 50 years of the survey of consumer finances, a detailed look at what Americans do with their money. Okay, so now there's an economic research going on, which is conducted by Ulrich Malmendier and Stephen Nagel, and they have dug through 50 years of record, like what Americans do with their money. In theory, people should make investment decisions based on their goals and the characteristics of the investment options available to them at that time. But that's not what people do. In theory, people should make investment decisions based on their goals and characteristics of the investment options available to them. Right? So this is the theory only, but that's not what people do. People don't actually follow theory. What people do? The economists found that people's lifetime investment decisions are heavily anchored to the experiences those investors had in their own generation, especially experiences early in adult life. Okay, so people don't follow theory, they only invest as per their experience in their generation. Like, whatever they have experienced in their early adult life, they are gonna follow only that investment tactic their whole life. If you grew up when inflation was high, you invested less your money in bonds later in life compared to those who grew up when inflation was low. If you happen to grow up when the stock market was strong, you invested more of your money in stocks later in life compared to those who grew up when stocks were weak. I hope you understood this para. If not, then I can repeat it. If you grew up when inflation was high, you invested less of your money in bonds later in life compared to those who grew up when inflation was low. Like you have experienced inflation, high inflation, then you are not gonna invest all of your money in bonds, okay, in late in life, because you know that this fixed return that you're gonna get will be consumed by the inflation, high rate of inflation, and then it will be worth nothing. That's why. The Economist wrote, our findings suggest that individual investors' willingness to bear risk depends on personal history, not intelligence or education or sophistication, just the dumb luck of when and where you were born. So, individual persons' willingness to bear risk. How much we are gonna bear risk? It depends on our personal history. No intelligence, no education, and nothing else. No financial tactic. Only our personal experiences. The Financial Times interviewed Bill Gross, the famed bond manager, in 2019. Gross admits that he would probably not be where he is today if he had been born a decade later or later. The piece said Gross's career coincided almost perfectly with a generational collapse in interest rates that gave bond prices a tailwind. That kind of thing doesn't just affect the opportunities you come across, it affects what you think about those opportunities when they are presented to you. To Gross, bonds were wealth generating machines. To his father's generation, who grew up with and endured higher inflation, they might be seen as wealth incinerators. Okay, so Gross, what Gross is saying, Bill Gross is saying to Financial Times that if he had been born a decade later or later, he wouldn't have invested in bonds. Okay. The differences in how people have experienced money are not small. Even among those you might think are pretty similar. Okay, so every people behave differently with their money. Take stocks. If you were born in 1970, the S&P 500 increased almost tenfold adjusted for inflation during your teens and 20s. That's an amazing return. If you were born in 1950, the market went literally nowhere in your teens and 20s adjusted for inflation. Two groups of people separated by chance of their birth year go through life with a completely different view on how the stock market works. I'm going to repeat this sentence because this is the crux of this para. Two groups of people separated by chance of their birth year go through life with a completely different view on how the stock market works. Because earlier in 1970, it has increased around like tenfold, so inflation got adjusted. But in 1950, the same return was not feasible. So here's a graph. If you want to study, you can just go check it out and study it. Or inflation, if you were born in 1960s America, inflation during your teens and 20s, your young, impressionable years, when you are developing a base of knowledge about how the economy works, send prices up more than threefold. That's a lot. You remember gas lines and getting paychecks that are stretched noticeably less far than the ones before them. But if you were born in 1990, inflation has been so low for your whole life that it's probably never crossed your mind. Okay, so in 1960s, if you were born, inflation was threefold and the paycheck was getting increased in less percentage. But in 1990s, inflation was very low, so you haven't noticed it. So the author is only trying to say, like, if you were born in during different situation in different years and experience different level of inflation, different levels of stock market returns, then you are gonna invest differently. Your view of money will be different. Correct? So this was the whole point. We'll continue later in next video. Thank you.